Man, I still get chills thinking about it. This whole thing happened back in '08, right after I graduated college. I was 22, fresh out of a relationship, and feeling this pull to just drive. No destination, no plan, just me, my old beat-up Honda Civic, and the endless asphalt. I'd been on the road for about a week, chasing sunsets and cheap diners, living on coffee and the kind of freedom you only get when you have nothing to lose. I wasn't the kind of guy who believed in ghosts or anything, not really. I was a realist, a practical guy who trusted what he could see and touch. My life was pretty simple back then, working odd jobs, saving up for a cross-country trip, and trying to figure out what I was going to do with the rest of my life. That night, I was on some desolate stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere, the kind of place where the stars are so bright they look like they're screaming. The engine was starting to sputter, and I knew I needed to pull over and get some sleep before I broke down for good. That's when I saw it. The old roadside motel. The sign was flickering, a ghost of a light in the pitch-black night. The letters were peeling, and the neon was a sickly green. It looked like something straight out of a horror movie, but I was so exhausted I didn't care. The parking lot was empty, a sea of cracked asphalt. A weird, almost sickly sweet smell hung in the air, like rotten flowers and something else, something I couldn't quite place. I walked into the lobby, and the air was heavy and still. It was like I had walked into a freezer. A guy was sitting at the front desk, and he was something else. He was probably in his late 60s, but his eyes were so young and so dark. They were like two black holes. He had this unsettlingly wide, fixed smile that didn't reach his eyes at all. It was more like a grimace. I told him I needed a room, and he looked at me with those eyes and that smile and just said, "Room 13 is the only one clean right now, sir." I tried to tell him that there were plenty of lights on, that I didn't mind a room on the second floor, but he just shook his head slowly, never breaking eye contact. "It's the only one." He slid a heavy iron key across the counter. It felt impossibly cold in my hand. I just wanted to sleep, so I took it. I didn't argue. I didn't question it. I should have. The room itself was just weird. It was sparsely furnished, just a bed, a bedside table, and this massive, dark wooden armoire that looked like it had been there for a century. The air was thick, heavy with that strange, sweet smell I'd noticed outside, but now it was stronger, mixed with the damp, earthy scent of old, rotting wood. The whole place felt like it was holding its breath. I barely even had a chance to drop my duffel bag before a bone-deep weariness hit me. I just wanted to crash. I didn't bother with the shower, didn't even take my shoes off. I just fell onto the bed, and before my head even hit the pillow, I was out. I don't know how long I was asleep, but I was woken up by a sound. At first, it was just a faint scratching, a soft, almost rhythmic noise coming from inside the armoire. My first thought was mice, but it was too slow, too deliberate. The sound changed, morphing from a scratching to a low, muffled whisper. I couldn't make out any words, but it sounded like a conversation, or maybe a quiet argument. I told myself it was just the wind, the old building settling, but the whispering grew into dry, rustling laughter, a sound that was somehow completely devoid of joy. And then, the scratching started again, but this time, it was louder, almost like something was clawing at the inside of the wood. My heart started to beat in my throat, a frantic, panicked rhythm. It was a cold, gripping kind of fear, the kind that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up. My mind, my logical, rational mind, was screaming at me to get up, to do something, anything, but my body felt frozen. I couldn't just lie there. The sounds were getting louder, more aggressive. The laughter was now a high-pitched cackle, a sound that felt like it was scraping against my sanity. I forced myself to sit up, my whole body a tense, coiled spring. The silence of the room was gone, replaced by this symphony of dread coming from inside the armoire. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to get out, to run. But something else, a morbid curiosity mixed with a kind of paralyzed terror, made me stand up. My legs felt like lead, and my hand was shaking so badly I had to grab the doorknob with both hands to keep it from rattling. The wood was cold, and I could feel the vibrations of the scratching coming through it, a low, constant thrum. I took a deep breath, trying to be rational, telling myself it was nothing, just a weird, old piece of furniture. But I knew it wasn't. I could feel the cold radiating from the armoire, a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. It felt like something was breathing on the other side of that door, Waiting, with a shuddering breath, I twisted the knob. The hinges groaned, a sound that seemed to scream into the silence. The door swung open, and the darkness inside was total, a void that swallowed the scant light from the room. It was an impossible blackness, like looking into a deep well with no bottom. The smell, that sickly sweet, rotting smell, hit me like a physical punch. It was overpowering, so thick I could almost taste it. And that's when I heard it. A small, thin voice, right next to my ear, a child's voice, whispering, "You shouldn't have come here." My blood ran cold. I stumbled back, my eyes fixed on the impenetrable darkness, a terror so profound I couldn't even scream. As I reeled away, my hand hit something on the nightstand, a crumpled piece of paper. It was a newspaper from years ago, yellowed and brittle. The headline, in bold, stark letters, read, "Family of 4 found dead in local motel." Below it, a grainy photo of the very room I was standing in. The article mentioned a brutal murder-suicide, the room being permanently sealed off. My eyes darted from the paper to the armoire. The whispers were louder now, a chorus of angry, broken voices. I was trapped. My gaze flicked from the yellowed newspaper back to the pitch-black void inside the armoire. My mind, which had been racing a moment ago, just stopped. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were a low, guttural chorus of angry, broken voices, a symphony of torment that seemed to echo inside my skull. The air in the room got colder, a biting, unnatural cold that made my breath visible. I took a step back, and as I did, I saw them. 2 pinpricks of crimson light, deep inside the darkness of the armoire. They weren't just red. They were a furious, hateful red, like 2 glowing embers from a dying fire, full of rage and malice. They stared at me with an intensity that felt like a physical weight, pressing down on me, suffocating me. The voices intensified, and a single, high-pitched giggle sliced through the other sounds. It was the sound of a child's laughter, but it was twisted, malicious, and bone-chillingly joyful. The smell of rotting flowers became overwhelming, a cloying stench that clung to my clothes, to my skin, to the very air I was breathing. It felt like I was drowning in it. That's when I finally snapped out of my frozen state. The terror that had paralyzed me was replaced by a primal need to survive, to escape. I spun around and lunged for the door, my hand fumbling for the doorknob. I twisted it, once, twice, a third time, but it wouldn't budge. I rattled it, my knuckles white, but it was stuck fast. I tried to scream, to call for help, but all that came out was a strangled gasp, a wheezing sound that was swallowed by the heavy silence of the room. My heart was a drum in my chest, a frantic, panicked beat. Behind me, the wood of the armoire began to groan. I looked over my shoulder and saw the doors, massive and solid, beginning to bulge outward, as if something incredibly heavy was leaning against them from the inside. I felt a surge of adrenaline and ran to the single window, yanking at the frame. It was painted shut, sealed tight, a permanent fixture. There was no escape. I was completely and utterly trapped inside a tomb, and whatever was in that armoire was about to get out. The bulging grew more pronounced, and the first splintering crack of wood echoed through the room like a gunshot. The sound of splintering wood was deafening. With a final, explosive crack, the armoire doors tore free from their hinges, flying across the room and crashing against the far wall. But nothing physical came out. Instead, a wave of that sickly sweet stench, now mixed with the acrid smell of burnt plastic and dust, washed over me. And then they appeared. Not a solid form, but a swirling, shadowy vortex of what looked like shattered glass and smoke. Within the vortex, I could see them, for indistinct figures, shifting and twisting. A man, a woman, and 2 small shapes, children. Their features were a blur, a smear of anguish, but their eyes were the same furious, crimson embers I had seen from the darkness. They floated above the ground, their bodies writhing in an agony that was so palpable it made me want to vomit. The whispers were no longer a chorus. They were distinct, overlapping screams of pure hatred and despair, a cacophony that ripped at my sanity. They weren't just ghosts. They were a storm of pure malice, a physical manifestation of a family's final, brutal moments that I stumbled backward, my mind short-circuiting. There was no logic to this, no rational explanation. All I could feel was the bone-deep, shivering cold and the overwhelming terror. I scrambled to the other side of the room, but as I did, one of the smaller, childlike forms materialized right in front of me, its hazy shape blocking my path. It didn't have a face, just a void where one should have been, but its laughter, a high-pitched, mocking giggle, echoed in my ears. I dodged to the left, but the woman's form was there, a swirl of dark mist, and a hand, a cold, spectral hand, brushed against my arm. It felt like being touched by liquid nitrogen, a freezing burn that made me cry out. I spun around again, my eyes wide, and saw the man's form floating near the ceiling, its crimson eyes fixed on me. They weren't trying to kill me, not yet. They were toying with me, savoring my fear, feeding on my panic. They weren't contained by the room anymore. They were the room. I was cornered, my back against the wall, a circle of shadowy figures slowly closing in, their whispers and laughter a tormenting serenade. There was no escape. I was just a toy in their horrifying game. I was backed against the wall, a physical embodiment of my terror. The figures circled me, their laughter and whispers now a high-pitched shriek, a sound that felt like it was tearing my eardrums. The air was thick with the smell of death and something else, something like burnt sugar. My mind was gone, my body shaking uncontrollably, but in that moment, something shifted. It wasn't bravery or courage, but pure, unfiltered rage. I was tired of being their plaything. I was done being scared. A guttural scream ripped from my throat, raw and desperate. "Leave me alone." I roared, my voice hoarse and broken. I wasn't pleading, I was demanding. I was screaming every ounce of my remaining humanity at them, a defiant, furious cry against their despair. The shadows recoiled, a collective intake of breath that wasn't a breath at all. The cackling stopped. The red eyes blinked, as if surprised, and for a fleeting second, the chaos in the room turned into a stunned silence. They weren't expecting a fight. They were used to feeding on passive fear, not being screamed at by a living person. That moment of silence was my only chance. The man's shadow, the one that had been floating by the ceiling, wavered. His red eyes flickered, and for just a split second, I saw something else in them. Not malice, but a profound, heart-wrenching sadness. His hazy form slowly lowered a spectral hand, pointing not at me, but at the crumpled newspaper on the nightstand. A whisper, clearer than the others, drifted toward me. A single word: free. My mind, racing, put it all together. They weren't trapped by the room. They were trapped by the memory, by the horror of the event. The newspaper was a physical anchor. In a frantic move, I dove for the nightstand, snatching the brittle, yellowed paper. As the shadows lunged back at me, I started tearing, ripping it into pieces, my hands moving so fast they were a blur. "You're free," I screamed, my voice raw with desperation. The moment the last piece of paper fell to the floor, the world went silent. The crimson eyes faded, the shadowy forms dissipated into a wisp of smoke, and a final, low, mournful wail, full of an incomprehensible sorrow, echoed through the room before it too was gone. The smell vanished. A gust of wind rushed through the room, and I heard a quiet click. I turned and saw the doorknob, which had been stuck for so long, had now unlocked. I stumbled out, leaving the key on the floor, and I didn't stop until I was back in my car, peeling out of that empty parking lot without ever looking back. The memory is still so vivid, and I still don't understand it, but I know one thing: they finally moved on. It was a couple of years ago, back when my life was a blur of deadlines and late nights. I was a junior architect, and my boyfriend, Pedro, was neck deep in his master's degree. We barely had time to breathe, let alone see each other. So, when he surprised me with a weekend trip, I was ecstatic. A real, honest-to-God escape from the city. Our plan was to drive to this small, cozy cabin by a lake we'd seen online. A place with no Wi-Fi, no distractions, just us. It was supposed to be a romantic reset button. We packed a small bag, grabbed some snacks, and hit the road with the sun setting behind us. The drive was peaceful, just the two of us, a playlist of our favorite indie bands, and the promise of a quiet weekend. I remember thinking how lucky I was, how this was exactly what we needed to reconnect. The atmosphere shifted the moment we pulled into this Sunset Motel parking lot. The neon sign was flickering, a lonely, pulsating red against the twilight sky. It was late, and our plan was just to crash here for the night and continue the journey early in the morning. That's when I saw her. A woman, standing completely still, like a forgotten statue. She was a silhouette against the dim light of the lot, but even from a distance, I could tell her hair was a mess of long, dark strands, and her dress was a stark, almost unnerving white, stained with something dark I couldn't quite make out. Her posture was odd, too, stiff and unnatural. She wasn't doing anything, just watching us, her eyes like two dark holes, fixed on our car as we parked. We tried to laugh it off, making a joke about a spooky welcome committee, but the chill she sent down my spine was anything but funny. She didn't move. Not a single twitch. I remember Pedro turning to me, his smile a bit forced, and saying, "She's probably just lost. Honey, let's just get our stuff." But my eyes were glued to the rearview mirror. As we got out of the car, I risked a quick glance back. She was still there, but now she was holding something in her hands, something that looked like a tarnished locket, running her thumb over it. Her face was so pale, it was almost translucent in the flickering light of the motel sign. Her eyes, however, they were alive, following every single step we took, every movement of our hands as we grabbed our bags. It was the kind of look that made the hair on the back of your neck stand up, a gaze that wasn't just looking, it was absorbing. Inside the room, the air was stale and heavy, a thick stillness that was hard to shake off. I immediately walked over to the window, feeling this magnetic pull to look outside, to check if she was still there. And she was, but now she was closer, standing right in front of our car. Her figure was a ghostly white against the darkness of the parking lot, and the stains on her dress were more visible now, brownish red splotches that looked like dried mud or something much worse. I felt a cold dread settle in my stomach. I tried to tell myself it was just a strange coincidence, that maybe she was a resident and we were just overthinking. But the way she was staring at our car felt deeply personal, almost possessive. I pulled the curtain shut, my hands trembling slightly, and tried to convince myself to forget about her, to just enjoy the night with Pedro. That's when Pedro finally looked. I was fidgeting with the blinds, and he walked over, trying to make me laugh by wrapping his arms around my waist. "Anna, what's wrong? You're being so weird." I pulled his hands away, telling him to look outside, to just see. He peered through the gap in the blinds, and the playful smirk on his face evaporated into a look of genuine confusion. "Wait, is that the woman from the parking lot?" he asked, his voice low and a little shaky. "What is she doing? She's not even facing us, but she's staring at the door to the room next to ours." It was a strange, unsettling tableau. The woman was standing a few feet from the neighboring room's door, completely still, her head cocked at an unnatural angle, as if listening for a sound we couldn't hear. I felt a wave of icy cold wash over me, a feeling that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. It was an instinct, a primal fear that something was terribly wrong. After Pedro and I watched her for a couple more minutes, her stillness somehow more terrifying than any movement she could have made, we couldn't take it anymore. We felt a strange, shared need to look again, to see if she was still there. We peeked through the blinds at the same time, our faces inches apart. But this time, she wasn't near the other room. She was closer. She was right in front of our door, her face pressed against the glass panel, pale and distorted. Her eyes were wide and black, and her lips were pulled back in a thin, chilling line. There was no sound, just a silent, suffocating presence. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a scream building up inside me, a silent, panicked wail. Pedro yanked me back from the window, pulling the blinds shut with a sharp, frantic tug. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my ears. We were trapped. This wasn't some weirdo in the parking lot anymore. She had found us that my body was trembling, and my mind was racing 1,000 miles a minute. Pedro, seeing the sheer terror on my face, grabbed his phone, his hands shaking even more than mine. We had to do something, anything. He dialed the front desk, his voice a strained whisper as he explained the situation. The woman on the other end, her voice tired and raspy, sounded like she was used to this. "A woman with long dark hair and a white dress, you say? She's always there." The way she said it, it wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact, as if this was just part of the motel's regular routine. She sounded almost melancholic, like she felt sorry for us. but there was a certain resignation in her tone, too, as if she knew there was nothing she could really do. She went on to explain that the woman was the former owner of the motel, a woman who had been brutally murdered in one of the rooms over 10 years ago. Her body was never found, and her spirit had lingered, haunting the property. She chooses a new victim from time to time, the clerk explained, her voice dropping to a near whisper. She'll get closer and closer from the parking lot to the other rooms until... The line went silent for a moment, and I could hear Pedro's panicked breathing next to me. Until what? He whispered into the phone, his eyes wide with fear. The clerk's voice, when it came back, was a low, chilling drone. Until she's inside the room with them. You shouldn't have looked at her, honey. You shouldn't have looked at her at all. And just like that, the line went dead. A dial toned out. We were frozen in place, staring at the phone like it was a time bomb. The silence in the room was so thick you could cut it with a knife, but it was a different kind of quiet now. It was a listening quiet, a silence full of dread. And that's when we heard it. A loud, jarring thud from outside. My heart leaped into my throat. We both held our breath, our eyes darting to the window, expecting to see her. But she wasn't there. The space in front of our door was empty. I felt a fleeting sense of relief, a brief, desperate hope that maybe she had given up. That maybe it was all just some sick prank, a story the motel clerk told to mess with people. Just as that small sense of calm started to settle over me, we heard another sound. It came from the bathroom, a slow, metallic scraping sound, followed by the undeniable splash of running water. My eyes locked with Pedro's, and in his face, I saw the same dawning horror that was taking over mine. The bathroom door, which we had left ajar, was now a sliver of darkness, a black hole from which the new sounds were coming. We moved slowly, as if in a dream, toward the door, our steps heavy and uncertain. The sound of water running grew louder with each step we took, a sickening gurgle that seemed to be filling the whole room. Pedro reached the door first, and with a shaky hand, pushed it open, revealing the sight that would haunt my nightmares for years to come. The faucet in the bathtub was running, a steady stream of water filling the porcelain basin, but there was no one in sight. The air in the small room was thick with a damp, bone-chilling cold that seemed to stick to my skin. Pedro took a tentative step into the room, and I followed, my eyes scanning every corner. Nothing, just the running water, a small cloud of steam, and the cold. But then, my eyes landed on the mirror above the sink. The reflection was slightly fogged over, but I could see us clearly, our faces pale with fear. And then, I saw her, standing right behind us. In the reflection was the woman. Her dark, matted hair was plastered to her face, dripping water onto the floor, creating a small, dark puddle around her feet. Her white dress was soaked, clinging to her emaciated body. Her face, however, was the worst part. It was a grotesque mask of what a human face should be. One of her eyes was a clouded white orb, the other a wide, dark pupil that seemed to swallow all the light around it. Her lips were a torn, bloody gash, and she had a wide, terrible smile that stretched from ear to ear, a smile without joy, a smile that was all teeth and malice. We didn't dare turn around, our bodies screaming at us not to. We just stared at her in the mirror, paralyzed by a fear so profound it was almost a physical weight. The smile on her face slowly widened, and her lips began to move, but no sound came out. Instead, a faint whisper, a ghostly hiss, seemed to echo from the running water in the tub, a sound that was not for our ears, but for our very souls. The room was suddenly colder, the air thick with the smell of wet earth and decay. Her reflection was getting clearer, sharper, and more terrifying. Her body started to shift, contorting in the mirror as if she was melting. Her head tilted, her long neck bending at an impossible angle. It was like watching a horrific ballet in reverse. Her hands, long and skeletal, slowly began to reach out, her reflection reaching for our reflections. A single, dark drop of what looked like oil dripped from the faucet into the water, and the whole room seemed to pulse with a low, humming vibration. We were frozen, unable to move, unable to speak, our minds trying to process this impossible, sanity-shattering reality. I felt a faint, cold touch on the back of my neck. Not a physical touch, but a phantom one, an icy sensation that made my entire body seize up. And then, a different kind of sound. not a sound that came from the room, but from within my own head. A woman's voice, but it wasn't a voice I'd ever heard. It was an echoing, hollow whisper, a sound that felt like it was scraping against the inside of my skull. It spoke a single word, a name I didn't recognize, and with it came a flash of images. A dark, empty room, a flash of silver, a pair of cold, dead eyes. I felt a surge of nausea, and my knees buckled. It was a memory that wasn't mine, a death that wasn't mine, being forced into my mind like a needle in a vein. Pedro's body was shaking uncontrollably next to me, and I could hear his choked sobs. He had seen it too, that impossible, horrific reflection of a woman standing right behind us. But he hadn't heard the whisper. It was just for me. It was for me. I felt my own tears streaming down my face, hot trails on my cold cheeks. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the image, trying to silence the echoing name in my mind. The sound of the running water in the tub was now a deafening roar, a waterfall of terror. I heard a muffled gasp from Pedro, and I opened my eyes just in time to see his reflection in the mirror being slowly consumed by the dripping, black liquid that was now seeping from the corners of her lips. It was then that I saw it. An old, tarnished locket on a chain around my neck. The same locket I had found in my grandmother's jewelry box, a piece I had never worn until this trip, a little silver heart with a single, small dent on the back. As her ghostly hand moved closer to my reflection in the mirror, it wasn't my throat she was reaching for, but the locket. The touch, when it finally came, wasn't a cold brush against my skin, but a sudden, searing pain, like a brand. I screamed, a long, tearing sound of pure agony, and a single, final image flashed in my mind. A woman, her hair matted with blood, clutching a locket, her face contorted in a final, horrifying grimace. I don't know how long I was screaming. It could have been seconds, it could have been an eternity. But when I came back to myself, I was on the floor, and Pedro was shaking me, his hands on my shoulders. The bathroom was silent. The water had stopped running. The air was no longer thick with decay, but was just a little chilly, like a normal motel room on a cold night. I looked up at the mirror. It was clear. There was no reflection of a woman with a torn face and dripping hair. Just us, two terrified people, huddled on the floor. I looked down at my hand and saw it. The locket. It was no longer a beautiful silver. It was black, tarnished, and warm to the touch. The small dent on the back was now a deep gouge. I remember clutching the locket and telling Pedro to get out, to run. We didn't even bother to grab our things. We just stumbled out of that room, into the empty hallway, and then into the deserted parking lot. I threw the locket into a storm drain as we ran, not daring to look back at the motel. I never told Pedro about the whisper, about the name, or the images that flashed in my mind. He knows something awful happened, but he doesn't know the full story, and I don't think I ever will. We drove for hours, not speaking, not stopping, until we were miles away, the rising sun a welcome, beautiful sight on the horizon. I've never seen that motel again, and I've never heard that name again. But sometimes, when I'm alone in a dark room, I can still feel a phantom touch on the back of my neck. And every once in a while, I find myself absent-mindedly running my thumb over the spot where the locket used to be, a small, quiet fear settling in my stomach, a reminder of the night I looked into a mirror and saw my own nightmare looking back. You know, it's funny how you think you've seen it all until something happens that just shatters your whole perspective. I'm Jorge, a long-haul trucker, and I've been on the road for the better part of 20 years. You can imagine the kind of places I've stayed, the greasy diners, the rundown motels that smell like stale cigarettes and regret. My life was a predictable loop of highways, truck stops, and the occasional night in a cheap bed. I was a creature of habit, and comfort for me was the hum of my engine and the feel of the steering wheel. This was back in '08, a couple of weeks before Christmas. The air was already getting that sharp, cold bite to it, and the nights were drawing in fast. I was on a haul from Texas up to Chicago, and I was dead tired, so I pulled off the interstate near some forgotten crossroads. That's when I saw it, the Crossroads Hotel. It looked like something out of a horror movie, all dark timber and peeling paint, with a neon sign that flickered like a dying heartbeat. But it was a bed, and at that point, any bed would do. I checked in with a guy who looked like he hadn't slept in a decade. his eyes like two burned-out coals in a pale face. He just handed me a key without a word. Room 113. The room itself was pretty standard for a roadside motel, maybe even a little worse. The bed creaked under my weight. The sheets felt like sandpaper, and the air had a thick, musty odor. I was so exhausted, though I didn't care. I just wanted to crash. I was out like a light, dreaming of home and a hot meal, when I was jolted awake by a sound. It was faint at first, barely a whisper, but it was there. A muffled groan, a low, guttural moan that seemed to be coming from inside the walls. It was right next to my head, right where the headboard met the wall. I sat up, heart pounding, and pressed my ear against the plaster. The sound was clearer now, a human sound, full of a deep and terrible pain. It was a person, sobbing, their cries choked and muffled, as if a hand was pressed over their mouth. I froze, not knowing what to do. What I was even hearing that I banged on the wall, a couple of solid, frustrated thuds. "Hey, everything okay in there?" I yelled, my voice a little louder than I intended. The sobbing stopped for a second, and then a new sound started. A scraping, scratching noise, like fingernails dragging across a blackboard, only duller, more sinister. It was a rhythmic, agonizing sound, and it was getting closer. It was right there, on the other side of the wall, and I swear to you, I could feel the vibrations through the plaster. I felt my skin crawl. The moans came back, louder now, mixed with the scratching. I picked up my phone, my hands shaking a little, and called the front desk. The guy on the other end, his voice a flat, dead monotone, picked up on the first ring. It was like he was waiting for my call that I told him about the sounds, the moaning, the scratching, my voice tight with unease. I expected him to be surprised, to offer to move me, or to go check it out. Instead, he just let out a low sigh, a sound full of a weary resignation. "Don't worry about it, sir," he said, and his voice was so unnervingly calm. "The sound in the wall, just ignore it. It's already too late." My blood ran cold. Too late for what? I asked, but he just hung up. The line went dead with a click that sounded like a coffin lid closing. My heart was a drum in my chest, a frantic beat against my ribs. I couldn't just ignore it. Not after what he said. The scratching had stopped, replaced by a low, whimpering cry. It sounded so close, so desperate. It was a cry for help, and I knew I couldn't just leave it. I had to see what was on the other side of that wall. I pushed the bed away from the wall, the rusted springs groaning in protest. That's when I saw it. At the bottom of the wall, near the dusty, stained carpet, was a section of plaster that looked different. It was a rectangle, slightly discolored and chipped at the edges, as if it had been forced back into place many times. I ran my fingers over it, and a fine powder of plaster dust came away. It was loose. My heart hammered against my ribs, a mixture of fear and a weird, morbid curiosity. I pulled out my old hunting knife, the one I used for everything from slicing apples to cutting rope, and carefully pried at the edge of the plaster. It came away with a soft pop, revealing a dark, yawning space within the wall. Inside, a tiny, rusted metal door was set into the concrete. It was no bigger than a shoe box, and in its center, a small, intricate lock glinted in the dim light of the motel room. That I stood there for a long moment, my breath catching in my throat. The whimpering was still there, but it was fainter, as if the sound had been swallowed by the silence of the wall. I knew I should just leave, get in my truck and drive, forget the whole thing. But I couldn't. Something inside me, some deep, primal need to help, just wouldn't let me. I looked at the lock and knew it would be a hell of a thing to open. I shoved my knife blade into the lock, twisting and prying until it broke with a loud, metallic snap. The tiny door creaked open, revealing a deeper, more profound darkness. The air that rushed out was cold, stale, and smelled of earth and something else, something I couldn't place. I squinted into the hole, and that's when I saw it. A flicker of movement, a pale, terrified face looking back at me from the shadows. That I widened the opening with my hands, pulling away more of the flimsy plaster until I could squeeze my head and shoulders through. The air inside was thick and damp, and my flashlight beam cut through the blackness, revealing a small, grimy room. It was tiny, barely big enough for me to stand upright. And there, huddled in the corner, was a girl. She looked young, maybe 18, with matted hair and a face streaked with dirt and tears. Her hands were tied behind her back, and a dirty rag was stuffed in her mouth. Her eyes, wide and terrified, locked onto mine, and a look of hope, so fragile and desperate, crossed her face. My stomach clenched. Who would do this? Who would hide a person inside a wall? My first thought was to get her out, to hell with everything else. I began to push my body through the hole, and relief, a wave of it so powerful it almost knocked me over, washed through me. She was alive. I was going to save her, but the relief was short-lived. A new sound, a deep, guttural sound, rumbled from the back of the room. My flashlight beam cut through the shadows, and I saw a pair of eyes glowing in the darkness. They weren't human. They were large, cat-like, and they glowed with a predatory, cold light. My breath caught in my throat. I swung the flashlight, and the beam landed on a creature hunched in the corner. It was a monstrous, misshapen thing, its body a grotesque mix of sharp angles and unnatural bulges. Its skin was a sickly gray, and it was bound to the wall by heavy, rusted chains that seemed to strain with every movement. A low growl, animalistic and full of hatred, vibrated in the air. The girl began to sob again, a desperate, muffled sound. "He's here," she whispered, her voice a thin, fragile thread. "He doesn't like visitors." The chains rattled, and the creature's low growl intensified, its eyes fixed on me with a malevolent glare. I looked at the escape route, at the terrified girl, and at the beast, knowing my choices had just dwindled to one. Fight or die? I didn't have time to think. Adrenaline was a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The beast lunged forward, the chains rattling furiously, and for a horrible second, I thought they were going to snap. It was trying to get to me, to tear me to shreds. I scrambled back, pulling myself out of the hole in the wall, my heart hammering so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. I fell on the motel room floor, my back hitting the carpet with a thud. I was breathing hard, my mind racing 100 miles an hour. I looked at the hole, and I could see its shadow, a monstrous shape shifting in the darkness, its glowing eyes fixated on me. The girl was still there, crying, her silent pleas a dagger in my gut. I couldn't leave her. I just couldn't. I looked around the room, desperate, my eyes scanning for anything I could use as a weapon. My eyes landed on the fire extinguisher by the door. It was heavy, a solid metal cylinder. It was my only chance. I grabbed it, the cold metal a shock against my trembling hands, and scrambled back to the hole. The creature snarled, a low, rasping sound that promised a violent end. I didn't hesitate. I rammed the fire extinguisher through the hole, aiming for its head. It roared in pain, a deafening shriek that made my ears ring. It thrashed against the chains, and the whole wall vibrated. I kept hitting it, a frantic, desperate attack, until I heard a loud crack. The creature went limp, its breathing a heavy, wheezing sound. I didn't stop to see if it was dead. I just knew I had a window. I reached through the hole and fumbled with the girl's hands, managing to cut the ropes with my knife. I told her, my voice a frantic whisper, to get out, to run. She scrambled through the hole, and I followed right behind her, my heart in my throat. We didn't look back. We just ran out. We stumbled out of the motel room and didn't stop to grab our things. The girl, shaking and sobbing, grabbed my hand, and we ran, her bare feet slapping against the cold pavement. We ran past my truck, past the front desk, and didn't look back until we were a good half a mile down the road. We hid in a thicket of trees by the side of the highway, shivering in the cold, listening to the silence. My heart was still a jackhammer in my chest, and I couldn't get the image of that thing out of my head. The raw hatred in its glowing eyes, the monstrous body, the chains. I looked at the girl. She was in a terrible state, but she was alive. I gave her my coat, and she huddled into it, her sobs finally starting to quiet down. She wouldn't talk about what happened, just shook her head and cried. I didn't push it. I knew what she had gone through was something I couldn't even begin to comprehend. After a few hours, the first rays of dawn broke through the trees, painting the sky in a soft, gentle light. It felt unreal, after the night we had just had. The world looked normal again, but I knew I would never see it the same way. We walked back to my truck, and I drove us to the nearest town. I found a diner, bought her some hot food and a change of clothes, and then took her to the police station. I told them everything about the hotel, the monster in the wall, the girl. They looked at me like I was crazy. The officer, a young guy with a skeptical look on his face, just listened patiently and then took my statement with a blank expression. He said he'd look into it, and that the motel had a lot of weird complaints. I knew he didn't believe me, but I didn't care. The girl was safe. That was all that mattered. I never saw her again after that. I hope she found peace. As for me, I sold my truck, got a job in a warehouse, and never set foot in a motel again. I still wake up some nights, sweating and shaking, and I can hear the scraping in the walls, the chains rattling, and I remember the glowing eyes of that thing. I don't know what it was or why it was there, but I know one thing for sure. Some things are better left alone.